Hey, I'm ZSH Welcome back to the Alpine Mountain Zoo. Today we're going to be building the zoo centerpiece, a big lake for grey seals inspired by the Norwegian Fjords. Before we start building, thank you all so much for your name suggestions last week. Our beautiful Weasant has a name and it's Luna. This is where we're going to be building today, in between the entrance area and the Himalayan Pass. It's our first ever habitat for grey seals. Let's go. In order to build this habitat, we're going to have to deal with the three hardest things in Planet Zoo: water, paths and terrain changes. You can see all the terrain changes built into this map here, and I want to preserve those. So we've run paths around the area where the lake is going to go, and now we need to work out where the water level is and how we're going to deal with that. So we're going to make a big sheet of concrete, and this is going to enable us to find out where the water level is and make sure that everything is built around it. This won't be part of the final build, it's purely a guide, so it doesn't matter what it looks like. We'll bury that underground, roughly where we think the water should go, and then we'll dig down to there and start digging out the terrain. We're going to be using a mixture of the terrain itself and glass barriers to hold the water in, but I don't want a single visible glass barrier anywhere in this build, so we're going to have to get very creative with how we do that. The way we're going to do it is to surround the whole area of the lake with glass barriers, and then once we've got all of those in place, we'll put the water in and see how high we need the glass barriers to get the water to the level that we want. So if we put some in there, you can see that's not high enough, it doesn't reach the banks on the taller part of the lake, so we'll raise the barriers a bit more and then try again. And there we go, we've got the water in the right place. Now we need to lower the barriers to that level where we can, and where possible, use terrain instead of the barriers. We're only going to use the glass barriers where we absolutely have to, and that means we've got less of them to cover up. That's where the concrete comes in, that shows us the level of the water, and then whenever we need to, we can delete the water and work with the terrain a bit. And where the terrain isn't high enough to keep the water in, that's where the glass barriers will remain, and the rest of them will just be turned into null barriers. The inspiration for this habitat comes from three main places. Firstly, the enormous lake for California sea lions at the Yorkshire Wildlife Park here in the UK, which is probably, from the sea lions perspective, the best habitat I've ever seen for seals or sea lions. And the stellar sea lion habitat at Paradise in Belgium, which has got really good theming and amazing underwater viewing. And then the overall look of it is going to be inspired by the fjords of Norway, which I visited last year. They're really beautiful, and the houses that surround those lakes are so cute with all their different colours. We're going to be mixing a lot of that influence in as well. That's the terrain work almost done. We want a couple of islands in the pool. We're going to have one made out of terrain, this one here, and then we'll have one made out of rocks. And now we've managed to get the water in where we want it, and there's only a few visible glass barriers, which we're going to cover up with rocks. In order to turn this into a habitat, we'll add some null barriers around here so that we can get a habitat gate in, and this will also be where the seals' indoor area and secondary pool is. Let's move on to the theming. In between the lake and the Himalayan Pass, we're going to have a row of cute little Norwegian style houses. These are going to achieve loads of different things for us. Firstly, they're just going to look really cute and make the habitat look really nice. Secondly, they're going to act as a focal point, so as guests round the path towards the lake, these are going to sit behind the lake and just frame everything in nicely. Thirdly, they're going to block out some of the view of the Himalayan Pass behind, along with a load of foliage which will keep focus on this area when people are in it. And finally, each house is going to have a little counter inside it where people can get food and drinks. What we're going to do is take this very basic shell that we've built here and then cover it in custom wood planks, and we can recolor them so that each little house is a different color, which is exactly how they were in Oslo when I was over there. It's simple but really effective, and it's going to look really attractive behind the lake. Before we do that though, we need to do some more terrain work. We've got a kind of hill here going up from the lake towards the Himalayan Pass, which looks really nice, but obviously we don't want these houses to be built on a hill when we've got people going into them to get food and drink. So we need to smooth this out and get this nice and flat, but still make it join on nicely to the area behind it. We'll get it flat, and then later on we can use some rocks to make a retaining wall between here and the Himalayan Pass. Let's get on to the wood paneling. So we're going to take this one wood piece, and we're going to make this a very kind of chocolatey, blacky brown, and cover the building with that. And then we'll pick some other colours for the other two buildings. We use different lengths depending on where we are in the building, so we can get it seamlessly up to the top. And we'll put some diagonal and vertical pieces in right at the top where the 1 meter long piece is too long to fit in horizontally, and we can get everything looking seamless. This habitat is actually going to solve a problem that I've had since the start of this zoo, which is, for me, you can't build a zoo without either seals or sea lions in it. They are so good to watch, always one of the best animals in the zoo. We've never built one without them. But how do you get one into a zoo that is themed around mountains? For obvious reasons, you don't find many seals or sea lions up a mountain. And then finally this week I hit on the idea of using the Norwegian fjords as inspiration, because the grey seal will often come into the fjords on the coast of Norway, and of course the fjords themselves are dominated by giant mountains. So where the mountains meet the sea is the theme of this habitat, and when it's done it evokes that feel really well, I think. Time to get our first food and drink into the zoo. We'll put a counter in here and then use some wood trim to tidy this up and sit it nicely into the building. This is a hot dog stand which will sell various snacks, and then we're going to have coffee and cakes as well. That's everything covered, and we'll colour this trim to match the red highlights on the rest of the building. And then we're going to use the back of a door to create a metal counter, some plaster panels to create interior walls, and then a few bits, as always, from Toves coffee shop pack to finish it off. And there we go, that's looking really nice at the back of the lake there. Now we can copy that building 3 times and recolour the copies, and finally we'll use some plaster to sort out this terrain a bit more and just make this feel like a proper area where people would go and get food, and it's not just sort of sat in the middle of a lawn. This is just 3 plaster panels and one of the plaster tower pieces, which curves it down nicely to the path, stops us having any sharp edges. And that's our little food and drink row done, already looking really cute behind the lake. There's one small problem though, we've got food and drink for guests, but no guests. So this episode is the first in a couple of episodes where we're basically going to build a path through the zoo. So we've got our entrance, and then we've got the raccoon and skunk habitat. And now with the lake that we're building today, that is the next piece of path. And then behind the lake, next week we're going to build the entrance to the Himalayan pass, and that will create an unbroken route through the zoo. And once we've got an unbroken route, then we can get guests in, and it's going to look a lot more realistic. At the moment there's just habitats dotted about, and it's not really going to work to get guests in here. Back to the seals, it's time to get the edge of the lake looking good. So we're going to use our rock arrangement that we've used throughout the zoo, and this time we're going to place some of these faux rocks on top of it to give it a more interesting texture at the top as well as the sides. And we'll drop those down, and then we can copy this around the lake. We're going to pretty much surround the lake with this. There'll only be a few places where we don't use these rocks, but by using them at different angles and then covering them up with foliage, it's not going to look copy-pasted by the end of it. We'll get a lot of variety in there with the foliage that we add to it. We'll also be adjusting the height to match the natural terrain, and we should end up with a pretty natural looking lake edge as well. These last 3 pieces of glass here are where the underwater viewing is going to go, and we will sort those out later. Next, it's time for a fence. So we're going to make a pretty simple wooden fence, which is going to fit the slightly more rustic vibe of this habitat. We've got 1 piece of the East Asian wood set, which has got a beautiful texture on it, and then we're going to use a couple of different wooden planks as well, which we can colour to exactly match the East Asian piece. Less is definitely more with this fence. We want something you don't notice when you're looking at the habitat. It's just exactly the kind of simple wooden fence that melds away into the background. We're going to have to adjust the height and the angle of each piece of fence individually, which is not fun. But once we place that around the majority of the lake, we're going to get a big rock pile in where the path curves here. This is the other larger rock pile that we've used throughout the zoo. As I've said many times before, you should always have a rock pile or 2 kicking about in your blueprints to save time when you're building. And then we're going to frame the view with this tree. We're going to position this exactly so that when the guests get to this point, they're going to have this view and their gaze will be directed towards the lake and the houses behind. Next up, we need to fill in the gap between the edge of the lake and the path. So we're going to use a mixture of buffalo grass and these custom Alpine style plants that we built back in episode 1, I think it was. And then we'll paint the terrain with soil as well so that it melds in nicely with the wood chipping path. And then finally we'll use a variety of the smallest faux rocks to line the paths in a random fashion. Now, a simple wooden fence is not going to keep the seals in this habitat, so we need some extra security. So we're going to use some mesh, which is going to be suspended over the edge of the lake to ensure that when they're in the water, the only places they can get out of the water are onto the 2 little islands or onto the main beach in front of the building. So we're just going to spin this round with a couple of wood pieces on it, and then we can copy this around the perimeter of the lake, and that will keep the seals contained. And then we can move on to the underwater viewing. I've seen some painfully small seal and sea lion habitats in zoos in my time, and apart from the obvious space consideration, I think the main reason that some zoos do that is to make sure that they're always visible in the underwater viewing windows. We're going to do it a little bit differently. With this huge lake here, in order to ensure visibility underwater for the guests, we're going to build a feeding platform on top of the underwater viewing gallery. So at feeding time, the staff would come up here and throw food down to the sea lions in front of where this viewing gallery is, so that the guests can see them swimming to get the food. We'll achieve that in game using the underwater fish feeder, which I guess the zoo could have as well, just to make sure there is maximum underwater action for the guests. And we'll use this metal fence that we created for the overlook in the entrance to keep the staff safe while they're up here and make sure the seals don't get up onto the feeding platform. And we're going to take this fence down along these rocks to create a pathway that the staff could walk up to get here. And then we'll move on and start detailing the feeding point. We'll put down a bucket that will be full of fish, and then we'll put down a little kind of trowel that the staff could use to throw the fish in without having to get fish guts all over their fingers. And then we'll put a little notice board on as well, so they can keep a record of the feeding. And then we'll just put some general kind of scenery around, some metal barrels that will make a few different colours. These will match the houses that we already have, some wooden barrels, a sack, some pallets. You always see pallets lying around in zoos, and then some kind of fishing style netting that's going to hang down off the side of the platform. This is one of the netting pieces from the Oceania pack. It's perfect for theming like this, and some of the other netting pieces in that pack are really good for building mesh habitats as well. And then finally a sign, make sure guests know there's something worth seeing here. And that's the viewing point done. Onto the islands. So we're going to use a rock pile again. They're so versatile. This time we're going to angle it and spin it around to get some really random looking rocks around the side of the island where the water meets the terrain. And we'll just keep putting these in. Don't worry about all the extra rocks it's creating. We'll delete those in a second. But when you use a big rock pile like this, it gets you a really natural look because you're not actually placing it in as intentionally as you would be if you were designing it on an individual rock basis. And we'll fill that in all the way around there. We're going to end up with about 1,000 rocks in here, but we can swiftly select and delete those once they're in there. And once we've got them in an arrangement we're happy with, we'll just use a bit of terrain paint to join the terrain onto the rocks nice and naturally. We're using a mixture of the rough rock, the coarse sand, and the fine sand. And then it's on to the enrichment items. So we're going to take the floating platform and get that roughly in the middle of the lake and position it in front of the underwater viewing window. And then we'll drop the underwater fish feeder I mentioned right in front of the windows. And then it's onto the beach. This will be an artificial beach, of course, and we're going to build it using the mud panels. If we recolor these, they do a great job of standing in for sand. And we'll just put this in and create a nice curve that goes from the left-hand side of this end of the lake right up to the fence on the right-hand side. And we'll use those same pieces rotated forward to create a lip on the edge of it as well. We'll also put a divider in. We want the seals to be able to separate from each other if they want to. So we'll have a divider halfway down the beach, and then they'll have a couple of islands to go onto as well. And then we can move on to the big building that will house all of the extra things that the seals need. This will be built in the same style as the houses. It will just be much longer and wider, and it's purely going to be implied. So the only thing that's going to be inside this building is the keeper gate, so our keepers can get in and out of the habitat. It's here because IRL, you would need a separation pool for the seals. Sometimes you need to separate males from females or two males from each other, things like that, and they'd need access to a pool. And then you also need an indoor area for any particularly bad weather. Although with grey seals living all the way from just below the Arctic on the North American coast down to the south coast of Britain, they experience pretty much all the weathers in the wild, so I don't think they'll be too bothered by any of the weather that we have at the Alpine Mountain Zoo. And with one more fence, just to make sure that the seals can't get out of the land portion of the habitat, that's the interior of the habitat done, and all we have left to do now is the signage. This is the habitat sign that we've been using throughout the zoo. It's just 3 pieces, the smallest billboard and 2 of hinge number 1 to fix it to the fences, but it's really effective. One of the best things about being in sandbox mode is you don't have to use those enormous habitat signs everywhere. And that's the signs done. Time to get the seals in. Introducing Alan, our male grey seal. I love the way he flops along the floor here, heading down to the water. And there's the habitat. I absolutely love this view with the houses in the background and then the mountains behind that. Our own little mini fjord. Loads of space for the seals. It's just under 1,000 square meters, this lake. Not as big as the one at Yorkshire Wildlife Park, but a lot bigger than most of the seal and sea lion habitats that I've seen in zoos. A little row of houses are looking good as well. Looking forward to seeing some guests in there. Let's check out the underwater viewing. There we go. Love watching the seals glide past. This is where we started today, and this is where we are now. Great to have a centerpiece in the zoo. Thanks for watching as always. Thank you so much to those of you who've joined the Explorers Club. Hit the join button if you want to see your name up here, and I'll see you again next week for some more Planet Zoo.